the Ask the Experts series, where I'm basically bringing in experts from different avenues that can speak to leadership, communication, anything to really help us professionally develop, as well as job search in the best way possible. So for those that are joining for the first time, my name is Emily Liu, and I'm a career happiness coach over at cultivate.com, which is a play on words for cultivate your life. I really believe that we can all design and achieve careers that we love. And today I'm super excited to bring on a good friend of mine, Lisa Gilette, who is also an amazing coach that specializes in leadership and specifically women, right? Women in leadership?
Yes.
Awesome. So I know you can introduce yourself way better than I can. So if you don't mind, let's hear a little bit about your background.
So I worked in corporate for 25 years. And I ascended the leadership ladder until I hit the glass ceiling. And then I retired and then I decided to become a career coach. And so the two primary focuses that are really driving me are the push for pay parity, because we are still only making anywhere between 54 cents to 87 cents on the dollar, which is not right.
Not right at all.
I want to also to help and support women in navigating corporate culture, so that they can ascend up the ranks of leadership all the way to the C-suite. Because I think as women, we tend to be more collaborative and we also consider the greater good. And that's the type of leaders that we need today, are leaders who are not just about what is good for me, but what is good for everyone and the community.
I love that. That's a really great mission. And I think that's a perfect segue into today's topic, which is all about how to improve communications in the workplace. And I know a lot of the communications goes into confidence and just really being able to articulate what it is that we want. And I know that you have a lot of great nuggets to share with us today. For those that are joining live, I do want to share that I have the comments posted. So if you guys have any questions at all throughout what we're sharing here, feel free to comment and we'll be able to answer your questions at the very end. So Lisa, if you don't mind, I really just want to kind of talk about communication in general, because it's something that people share all the time. Like, this is so important. Yet I feel like a lot of the times we feel as if we can't really improve our communications. Like, this is just the way that we're programmed. And I know we talked earlier before we went live a little bit about the differences between like men and the way they approach communication versus women, and just having a general awareness around that. Do you mind speaking to that a little and just kind of sharing what your insights are, and just kind of sharing around what the differences are typically from a gender perspective as we look at communication, especially in the workplace?
Yeah. So one thing I want to say before I talk about that specifically is actually we can adapt our communication styles, because when you're aware of how you communicate and you become aware of others' preferred method of communication, you can actually start to adapt. So I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later, but there is hope. Absolutely. There's room for improvement and there's room for growth.
Definitely.
The difference between men and women and how we communicate naturally. A little bit of a short story. Just think all the way back to when we were on the playa. No fire, no electricity, certainly no internet. The men went out, they hunted, they brought back the animals, and the women who stayed behind to take care of the families had to make sure that whatever was brought back was managed to keep the entire tribe happy. So men became very directive. Go and shoot the elephant, go and get the meat, bring it back, do it again. Whereas women were, is everybody fed? Is everybody clothed? Is everybody taken care of?
More nurturing.
Yeah, so we are by nature collaborative. We want to exchange ideas. And many times, because we are not thinking about pushing ourselves forward, we're thinking about taking care of everybody else, we don't always communicate our expertise and our potential. Whereas men tend to do that. Boys play King of the Hill. Girls play Tea Party. So we're kind of wired this way. Generally in communication, you'll see more men in the workspace will tend to be assertive, clear in their communication. Whereas when a woman is clear, she could be termed aggressive.
Yes.
So there's these gender biases going on that we also need to be aware of. And there are definitely workarounds for that.
Yeah, actually, I love to hear that because I know a lot of the women that spoken with and just what I've observed, they're really afraid of having to assert themselves because they're worried that they're going to be labeled the B word or
Right.
come off as aggressive, whereas their male counterparts, like it's completely fine, right? We hear this a lot. So if you don't mind, I'd love to hear a tip that you can share when women find themselves in this situation within the workplace.
So I would say one tip that I find super effective is when you are speaking to a superior, obviously you're going to be prepared. 3 bullet points, no more, and no explanations as to how you came to those bullet points, just the bullet points. If you're asked to explain, absolutely. But a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times as women, and we were talking about this earlier before we started the feed today, we feel like we have to explain how we got to the idea and justify it. Don't do that. It really does not serve you in the workplace. Talking to a superior, 3 bullet points, identify their pain point, answer it with 3 bullet points. Now, when you talk to a subordinate, let them ask as many questions as they need and give them a detailed explanation as to why you're asking them to do whatever it is you are and what their role and their function will be in performing that request and why they were asked to do it, because they have special knowledge, they have special expertise. This is really the basis of building rapport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like what you said about not having to over justify anything. And it really is oftentimes like a mental block that we have. Like we are afraid to insert our opinion and we feel like, well, we need to like rationalize why we're making this ask or this demand. And it is really interesting that women do this more than men. And I wanted to really dive in a little bit about the conciseness part because I love what you highlighted in terms of really speaking to like 3 bullet points. Here's what you need to know, just very brief, concise, direct, and then trusting that if somebody needs more information, they'll ask for more. And
Absolutely.
I'm actually curious, have you seen the article about Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, and how he writes a one-line sentence that everybody looks at as like the ticking time bomb because like in his emails he'll just write like one sentence or like one word and people are like, oh no, what do I do with this email? Because there's no explanation, there's no justification. It's just like, here's what I need, that's it.
So here's the thing that's really important about owning your expertise. None of us would have been hired into that job unless we could do the job.
Right.
Or knowing that you'd had enough experience to do the job and someone said, oh, and they have the potential to do the entire job.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to trust that you know your job. And that's a hard one for women to, we're told, don't brag, don't boast, it's not becoming. Whereas men are much more comfortable going, oh, I won the award and I'm king of the hill. And that's not how we're internally wired. But each of us is in a job because we know that job backwards and forwards. So
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Bezos, I got an email like that very similar once, and the email, and it was from the chairman of the board where I was working. It was a multi-dimensional company, and the word was crickets. And what it meant was he wanted to know what the heck was going on with this big project that
Yeah.
my division had been assigned. And I was not the head of my division. So it was a phone call and it was 3 bullet points. This is where we are. And he asked questions. And here's another tip. I didn't have answers to all his questions because I hadn't been in all the meetings. I didn't know.
Yeah.
So if you are asked a question and you don't have an answer, that's a good question. I asked that too. I'm working on that. As soon as I have that answer, I'll get back to you with it. And I hope to do that within the day, the week. But that's a great question. I don't have the answer. And I had that question too.
Yeah.
I'll get back to you with that.
I love that. Instead of just kind of wading through and trying to figure out the answer, it's so much easier and it's better for both parties to
Right.
know exactly what the answer is, even if they have to wait. But you'll know, like, I need to really navigate and research this and get back to you. But I think that goes back to the bottom line of communication. I once heard, like, it's always better to over communicate than under communicate. And just specifically what you mentioned there around, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to get it to you. And this is when I plan on doing that. It just, I think everything can be resolved when we are able to be open and honest and really just share it, what
Yes.
we know in a tactful way or what we need in a tactful way.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think to make a little point about the over communication. I had a boss once who, quite honestly, was a very difficult boss.
Hmm.
And sometimes we're told, and it depends on the person, if you would say to me, Emily, if you were my boss and you said to me, Lisa, I need you to finish this report by Saturday. And I responded to you and I said, I understand you want this report by Saturday. When I did that with this particular boss, who was a man, he was like, I just said that. So again, it's knowing your audience, but in the over communication, the way I walked around that was, got it. And then I'd send an email going, the report's coming to you on Saturday. And I would, so we have so many ways to communicate: text, email, verbal. You can use them all. But again, it's 3 bullet points. You're going to stick to them.
Yeah.
Whether it's email or communication or text or whatever. I think that's a really good point that you made.
Yeah, and I think it's also knowing your audience, right? And now after he mentioned, like, I don't need you to like repeat what I just said. You're not a parrot. Then you know, like, okay, in the future, like I can just confirm and it and or just send an email when you have the completed information. Here's what you have, right? But I think that's just with any relationship. You get used to what people need, what their preferences are, and then you adapt.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I want to also talk really quick about, you mentioned something earlier around how when you communicate, sorry, I lost my train of thought just now, but I want to talk really quick about the nonverbal communication too, because I know that's a huge piece of it, and you have some amazing stats that you can share with us around nonverbal.
Yes. Obviously, you can tell this is a topic for me that I'm so super interested in. In 2009, I found a study that was done in 1964 at USC, the University of Southern California. And basically, it talked about communication at 100%. And before you even open your mouth, the person who you're speaking to has an impression of you. And it's based on your gender and your race, which of course we can't change. But it's also based on your gender, your race, and what you're wearing.
Mm.
So obviously, the big tip for all of us is dress appropriately at work. We know that. But then the next about 38% is not the words, but your voice. So if I start speaking, I'm
You
not
already make some interpretations around this person.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I'm talking like this, you're going to think I'm a crazy person.
Yeah.
So it's keeping the voice at a level you can hear it at a speed that's understandable. And then the last 7% is actually the content. And that's why I pressed the 3 bullet points.
Yeah.
And you keep repeating those bullet points as requested to the person you're speaking with. But it's also why it's really important to have good posture, have a relaxed facial expression, maintain eye contact. Because I know that all of us have had conversations. If people have kids or as a child, when you would talk to your mom and something would go on, you're speaking to a person of authority and you'd be looking away and they'd be wondering what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So in any conversation, whether it's one of the difficult ones, whether it's one of the ones you're relaying information, keep eye contact.
Yes.
As best you can. And don't, none of this, but really erect, relaxed facial expression, eye contact, open heart, straight spine.
I really love the eye contact piece, and I teach how to network to a lot of my clients. And one of the biggest things is the eye contact, because you're absolutely right. When somebody starts looking away, it's almost like they're losing interest. And so you lose interest too, because you're wondering, is this person even listening to me anymore? Are they engaged? And if you can't keep that engagement going, that momentum fizzles. And so I actually want to give a quick example. I used to go to a lot of blogger events because I started to travel blog and I got invited to meet other bloggers. And I want to say, like, bloggers are notorious for breaking eye contact because they're all looking for like the next picture. Like, oh no, I don't want to miss like taking a photo of this. And so you'll be in like a one-on-one conversation and you can just see their eyes wandering to like the corners of the room. And then in that moment, like being on the recipient end, it's just like, wow, does this person want to talk to me? And then it just like really loses the rapport. And I think a lot of rapport is based on trust, respect, and likability. And that trust and that respect are immediately broken off in that moment. You lose eye contact.
Right. So imagine if you're in a situation where your boss is yelling at you, you know, your first response would be, I mean, I know I worked for two screamers over 25 years, and my first response was like, can I just leave the room? And if you're not engaged with them, then they go, well, they're not doing their job or they're not up to snuff or whatever. So I'm not suggesting anyone sit and take abuse. You can look at them very clearly and you can say, the situation's getting a little heated. I'll come back when we can actually talk about this. I'll call you in an hour, and get yourself out of that situation, but really very direct. The situation's getting heated, not you're going crazy. The situation's getting heated. I don't think we're having an effective conversation. I'll come back in an hour. Get out of the room.
You hit on such an important point to never use you in any type of conflict, because the minute you use the word you, it's like you're pointing the finger. And you did that so gracefully. You know, you explained the situation without using you in it. Like, you're being a butthole. No, like that's not what you're saying.
Or a stronger word.
Yeah, I was going to use the word ASS. But you're really neutralizing the situation, really sharing, like, this is what I'm observing. And then you use the word we, which is so important in communication, because again, it's not you, it's not I, it's like we as a collective. Right. And I think that goes into, just in terms of general communication and overall effectiveness, it's really understanding, how can we come together and resolve this situation? So do you want to talk a little bit about like how in communication you always want to come from a everyone wins mentality?
Oh, yes. That's building rapport. That is so important, because you know what? You can't choose your coworkers unless you're the hiring manager. And then you can choose your subordinates. So you may end up having a colleague that you're just like oil and water. And yet, if you always come from a place of, how can I help? How can I support the effort? What do we need to do here to complete this business objective? And it's also really watching your colleague. And a little trick that I think is really, really helpful is, people tend to speak and absorb information. Either they're very visual, or they're very auditory, or they're very much into the feeling that is created through the conversation. So in other words, if I say something like, I see how we could complete this objective, but your colleague says, well, it sounds right to me that if we do take these steps, we'll meet the business objective. You want to just slightly listen for those verbs and start to mirror very, very gently. Not obviously, but very gently. The other thing that you can do, which I think is really important, is to identify the pain point. And it's not just colleagues, but it's certainly your boss, your direct report. If you can understand what their biggest pain, their biggest issue is in their daily job, and speak to that, acknowledge and validate, that's an issue. I'm here to help you. that is going to go a long way. You always, you so succinctly mentioned using the we. We're in this together. We're part of the same team. We have the same business objective. You may have different talents, obviously you do, but you're coming together as a team. And so using those words again and again and again. And it is about crafting language, just like we get up in the morning and we get dressed for work and we go, does everything match? You're doing the same thing with your communication, because that's when people really understand and start to bond and build that rapport.
Yeah, I really like that analogy because if we think about it, a lot of it is creative, right? The way that we can say the same message like 1,000 different ways and around it,
Exactly.
but it's really about understanding. I want to say two things, right? Like one is understanding how do we make that person feel? Like that's important. It's not like what you say, it's how that person feels.
Exactly.
And then the second thing I think that is really important is really making sure that you're on the same page in the first place, like really clarifying. And that goes with affirming and validating. This is what I hear you saying, right? This is what I understand to be the issue. Because I think that's when a lot of disagreements and arguments
Exactly.
go haywire without like necessarily even needing to go haywire. It's generally because people are on two different tracks and they haven't really come together on the right track to understand the other person's perspective and
Right.
work towards that common goal.
Right. Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Effective People, this was a book that was really big in the 90s with self-development and business, said, speak to understand.
Mm.
So to your point about, did I hear you right? I heard you say, is that what you meant? That sort of language, especially with a colleague you're having a problem with, and in a one-on-one conversation with your boss, I would highly recommend that any sort of confrontation with your boss is one-on-one, never in a group.
Mm-hmm.
If your boss needs to have a little meltdown and you're in a meeting, let them have the meltdown and then follow up afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of one-on-one, but sometimes in that moment, if we're feeling like we're being attacked, we can do one of two things. We can melt or we can be very aggressive. And that's the time to just stand up straight, eye contact, just be very still,
Mm-hmm.
and then take it up afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is actually reminding me of I don't want to say a mistake. I don't believe it's a mistake, but something I could have handled better early on in my career. I didn't realize this very thing that you're just mentioning now about taking any type of corrective action one-on-one. But I remember like early in my career, I had a boss who we were at my workstation. The IT guy was there and the IT guy was I forget what exactly happened, but he was basically saying, why didn't you guys do this? And then I basically said like, oh, I never got this direction. And I was like very new there, but it basically threw my boss under the bus without realizing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my boss approached me after and was like, hey, the next time you need to say something, I'd rather you say it one-on-one because it makes us look weak as a department. And I just realized from that moment forward, like, oh yeah, if you have to understand how others feel. Like I didn't really take in their perspective. And for me, in my interpretation, it was very much like, oh, this is such a minor issue. But for my boss, his whole expectation was, I want to be perceived as somebody who's got everything together and that I understand like all of the logistical needs of my department. So I think that was a really big learning opportunity just to really put myself in another person's shoes, but also realize like if somebody had said that to me in front of other people, like it wouldn't make me feel good either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes, you're not coming from a place of being hurtful.
Not at all.
Some things just come out. And also in some instances, if someone else had said that, it wouldn't have bothered you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the other thing that I want to say. For all of us, watch how your boss, your supervisor communicates and really pay attention because really what you're doing with your boss, the whole point of being in a job is you're making your boss look good and you're solving their pain.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a really bad situation, and I know a lot of us have been there, when it's time to move on, then that's another conversation that you have with someone like you, who's a coach, who can help you get the next job and know where you want to go, and then also help you through the interview process so that you do understand that as an employee, potential employee, you're also interviewing too, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really important to really observe your boss so you understand who they are and what drives them and how they communicate.
Yeah. I'm curious, Lisa, like if you are trying your best to communicate and really have open discussions with your boss, but they're, for whatever reason, just very closed off or not willing to listen, which I hear a lot from corporate professionals who are just like, my boss is unsupportive. My boss doesn't help me. My boss asked another person over me to work on this special project when I clearly have the bandwidth and the skills to do so. Mm-hmm. When you find yourself in this situation, like what would you recommend at that stage?
Well, one thing I want to say just overall, never depend on your boss for career development, number one. Mm-hmm. Because if you have a boss who is supporting you in developing your career, that's golden.
Yeah.
Normally not the case. You're responsible for your own career development. The thing that I would say specifically to this is, before you get to that point of being incredibly impatient and just wanting to go, okay, I'm looking for the next job, identify the pain points. Everybody is under certain stresses and has certain deliverables at work. And there may be some deliverables or some pain points or some stressors with your boss that you're not aware of. If you can book half an hour and really be very clear about, this is what I'd like to do, this is how I'd like to help, this is how I'd like to support the department, and then come up with 2 or 3 solutions or even one. Mm-hmm. And have that conversation, then you know you've done everything you can to try and build rapport and be an effective and valuable team member. And if you really find and I've been there, I had to get the next job. Mm-hmm. Because I knew that it was not going to get any better.
Yeah.
So, but you have to make that attempt.
Right. I think you hit on something really important is you can't get what you want if you don't ask. And what you did was really map out, these are potential solutions. And I think, I don't know where this phrase comes from, maybe you know, or this quote, but you should never go to somebody with a problem unless you have the solution.
Yes.
You know where it comes from?
I don't know where it comes from, but it's brilliant. I mean, yeah. That is, like said, that's a mantra that we can all live by.
Definitely. And I think it's really important if you're unhappy in the workplace or you're unhappy with how things are communicating, whether it's between a colleague or a boss or client, that you address what that issue is, but you also at least propose at least one solution and how you can improve that. And just by communicating that very thing, I really believe it mitigates like a lot of the unnecessary stress and anxiety that comes with these awkward situations.
Yes.
And only then, like after you've really, really tried, that I think it's worthwhile moving on to another opportunity. But I have so many people who come to me that when they say, I'm so unhappy in my current job, like nobody's supportive. And when we really dig into it, they haven't even tried communicating. Mm-hmm. And to me, what that does is it just follows you along because no situation is going to be perfect. No yes. company is perfect. No boss is perfect. Yes. We're not perfect human beings. But when we can learn how to communicate on our own behalves, that is when the real magic starts to transform.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
We have so many different avenues to go. I want to go back to the clothing, the nonverbal that you spoke of, as well as what you mentioned earlier around how most women, like they don't meet or they don't feel like they own up to their expertise, especially during the interview stages, right? So I think these are kind of two tandem is really understanding how to be more confident so that you match your communication. Because with that 7% content, that is
so scary, so scary.
Yeah. So the reason why I bring this up is because I have a lot of clients who do get invited into interviews. I want to say it really is more women than men that go into this feeling of imposter syndrome. Like,
Absolutely.
oh my gosh, I don't know if I can get this job. I don't know if I'm going to do well. I hope that like I'm able to meet my hiring manager's expectations. But what I want to tell them is you got the interview. They like what they see. You have the expertise. You have all of the experience that you could possibly bring to the table. But it's really the confidence that breeds confidence. And if you don't have that, you don't clearly articulate and communicate and build that trust and rapport non-verbally, it's going to be really hard to convince that person you're the right hire.
Right.
So do you have any practical tips aside from the clothing? By the way, clothing makes a big difference. When I am in my PJs, I feel like crap, and I probably show up as crap as a result. But when I, put on a nice blouse and I'm really like polished, I feel like instantly more confident.
Yeah, yeah. That even before you get to what am I wearing for the interview and what am I saying, which there are certain very simple strategies to use there. One thing that I always used to do, and it's funny, and I've been talking to other people, keep a notebook every day at your desk, and at the end of the day before you leave, or keep an electronic file, write down what you did during that day and the accomplishments. Because what happens is you tend to forget.
Mm-hmm.
That client you landed, that big report you did that made a difference, the revenue you generated, that system you created that created more efficiency for the company. Unless it's something really, really big, you tend to forget. So really, this is about looking at your accomplishments, writing them down every day, and then going back at the end of the month and highlighting.
Mm-hmm.
These are the bullet points that you're going to use in your elevator speech. The 2-minute, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is the problem I solve, and this is the end result. And it's scripted. Don't kid yourself. People, when you listen to leaders and you see them speak, you'll go, oh, I heard that leader speak 3 months ago, and they told the same story.
Mm-hmm.
And they described themselves the same way. So again, it's those same idea of the bullet points. When you're having a conversation with your superior, you really need to be able to speak very clearly and succinctly. But then when you get into the interview process, again, you're going to do your homework. So you're going to do all of the research on the company, and you're going to ask yourself, why do I want to work for that company? And you're going to bullet point it. Because remember, in an interview, you're interviewing them too.
Yes.
They may not be the perfect fit for you. And if that's the case, get out of that mindset of, I really want this job. And you go up and you realize your values are completely different than the company you're now working for. So with preparing for an interview and how you present yourself, again, you do your research and you bullet point it and you stay on script and you're aware of your previous accomplishments. And you look at your job description from your previous job and you realize the functions you did, that's your expertise. And you have to be able to speak to it. So if someone is, say someone is a talent agent. I'm working with a woman right now who's a talent agent, and she's great at negotiating deals. The whole component she left out is her amazing people skills. She is really good at making people feel comfortable. That was nowhere on her list of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing is, as you get into more managerial roles, it's not about your functionality and, oh, I can build or I can do. It's how you interact with people to motivate and inspire them. That's a big skill set.
Yeah.
So it's really just going back and very critically, it's keeping that list because we forget. And things that come easy to us, we go, oh, well, anybody could do that. Well, actually, no, they can't.
I was just going to highlight that. Yeah, I feel like a lot of us feel that what we want to share as our skills are just really ordinary. Like anybody can do it, but the truth is that ordinary people wish they could do it. And I love the book Ordinary Superpowers by Mark Henson, and he has a really great exercise in there to discover your superpowers, which are ordinary superpowers. But it is really true. And the more, like, that's why all job descriptions emphasize must be able to communicate. Like, you would think that this is a given, that everybody knows how to do this, but we're having this live here today because we realize there's a lot that goes into the EQ. So I would say, like, the technical skills, what your functionality is, that really goes into your more like technical skills, right? Like hard skills. But a lot of it is the soft skills and the EQ, which people are really vetting you for. Like, are you going to be that person who knows how to deal with conflict? Because there's conflicts in every workplace. Are you going to be that person who inspires and motivates a team, or are you going to be the one who brings them down? So
Exactly.
it's really, really important to have that. And I like your exercise around the accomplishments and really keeping that running journal. And I think this is something that I haven't actually come up with a list of ongoing things, although I need to. But one thing that I do is I journal every day. And when I read back to my previous entries, I realize, like, wow, I completely forgot about that specific thought or that specific win. And it's just an instant, like, credibility boost as well as a confidence boost, because we are so competitive with ourselves, right? We always think about the future. We're very much focused on, like, why are we there, not there yet? But then if we look back at the past 30 days, 6 months, we can see, like, how much we've grown and how much we've done and how much we've helped others. And I think that is a really good mindset to go into when you're walking through any interview, just really reminding yourself and being kind and gentle and realizing, like, wow, even if when I didn't know something in the past, I absolutely figured out the answer. Or when I wasn't sure how to handle this, I ended up handling it, right? Yeah. So I think that goes back to your stat around, when women look at job descriptions and they only meet 80% of the qualifications, just know, like, even if it's 60%, like, you can still go for the job, but you have the inner capacity to really think about, how am I going to learn the other 40%?
Right. And that's the thing that's really interesting, is that when you do look back and you look at the jobs you've had and you start to think about, well, wow, I was tasked with this thing and I didn't know how to do it. Oh, but I did it. There's the confidence boost, and you dig in a little bit more and go, okay, so what skills did I use? What was it? Oh, I learned, I researched, I spoke to experts, whatever it is. And you start to realize, oh, these are the skills that I take everywhere.
Yeah.
It really is empowering. It really
It
is.
is. And it's something innate inside of us that allows us to be successful. So, what is that specific trait? And how do we apply that to our next situation? Right.
Exactly. Exactly. We tend to forget that unless you really do keep that list.
Definitely. So, Lisa, I know we could talk for days. We've covered so much already, but I want to just ask, like, if there's anybody out there who is really looking to improve their communication, like they just want to be more effective in speaking up for themselves in the workplace or dealing with any conflicts, what would you say is, like, your top advice for them?
I would again say really spend either half an hour or an hour. I would say give yourself an hour. And when you know you're going into that difficult conversation, really think about what you want the result to be, and then
Mm-hmm.
reverse engineer.
Love that.
And I would also say, in every meeting you go into, half an hour before you go into that meeting or the night before, because a lot of times in meetings with your boss and your team, that's when your supervisor is going, oh, I like the way she handled that. Or I liked her idea to troubleshoot that.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure in every meeting you write down 3 bullet points because the reason I'm stuck with 3 is we breathe in 3/4 time, and 3s, triptychs tend to stick. You look at advertising, it's always like 3 lines of copy or 3 notes or whatever. Write down 3 bullet points that you're going to share in that meeting. And quite honestly, when you've got that list, either on your computer or next to your desk of your accomplishments, one of those bullet points had better be one of those accomplishments from the last week. Oh, and by the way, the project that we were concerned about, well, it delivered.
Mhm.
By the way, that's that problem you talked about, Mr. Boss, Mrs. Boss, whatever, Ms. Boss. I have a solution. I can talk about it now, or I can present my report to you. You really do want to engage, and it doesn't, in the light of a conference room when everybody could be chatting, and you want to be prepared. So you need that thinking time before to do your homework. One other thing that I really want to speak to is being interrupted.
Oh yeah, that happens a
Oh,
lot.
yeah. So 2 notes. One is when you say, I have this great idea. If we contact the customer and we give them a survey, we're going to know their desires. And nobody really responds. And then David, 5 seats down, says the same thing. And he's like, oh, David, great idea. And you had the same comment. You can do one of 2 things. You can have your circle of support where you've actually contacted a colleague previous that you're close with, and you can say, let's amplify each other in these meetings.
Mhm.
So your colleague will speak up, Sue made that same comment that David just made. Can we circle back to Sue? Because I think she's probably done a lot of research on it. Or, and this is what I did, David, thanks so much. I don't think anybody heard me say that the first time. I just put it out there.
I
So
really like that first one of having like an internal advocate. And I love that you put this into the workplace like meeting context, because I think it is always good to have people who can speak for one another.
yeah,
But that also reminds me of networking and how like I have a lot of clients who are really timid and shy about like talking about themselves. As you mentioned before, like a lot of us can be very like we're just taught not to boast, right? So it's really
yes.
unnatural to go out and share about like, yeah, these are all of my amazing accomplishments. I think eventually though, it's important to own up to your expertise and just feel unapologetic about sharing that. But I often think like it is really powerful coming from another person. And so one thing that I have taught my clients to do is if you feel uncomfortable starting out in networking, find somebody who you can go to a networking event with and then introduce each other, because it's very powerful to say, Lisa is an amazing coach rather than me saying like, I'm an amazing coach and vice versa, right?
You are
So
an
we
amazing
really
coach.
prop each other.
You are an amazing coach. That's one thing that we all have as women. If you really think about it, when we see a need for the community or for the individual, we're right there supporting them.
Mm-hmm.
And we never think to do that for ourselves.
Definitely. And
You know,
we're more powerful together. We can support
absolutely.
each other and lift each other up. And that's
Exactly.
also the best traits of a leader. If you want
Correct.
people to get promoted, people will recognize you and remember you for the way you show up. And the more collaborative you are, the more you praise other people. Like what organization doesn't want a boss like that, right? So even if you feel like it's shortening yours, like stunting your growth because you're putting other people first. It's actually the opposite in what
Yes.
I've seen, because people are very observant and they observe these qualities and these nonverbal things that you're doing as well. And that kind of goes back to like the meeting. If you're constantly the one who is quiet and not speaking up and sitting there, even though you're not saying anything, people see that too. And they're going to start interpreting who you are as a leader. And I think that's just really important to get clear. What do you want to be recognized for? Who do you admire? What are those reasons you admire them for? How can you start to mirror that or emulate some of that into your conversations and your day to day?
Right. I think that's a really good point, how to model the leader you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it is more difficult for women to get sponsors and mentors, but you can also model yourself. One of my most favorite leaders that I model myself happened to be a guy who was 20 years older than me, who was Australian and totally different background. And yet I watched him motivate and inspire others. And I was like, I'm going to model that behavior. And I watched, he knew people's names, he engaged with them. And he always said, thank you. You helped us do this. And that's exactly what you're talking about here, is that really, I appreciate the job. I appreciate you. That is, you mentioned this earlier, Emily. People don't always remember what you say. They always remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful mantra to live by, because that's really what communication boils down to. If you can remember, like, how did I make that person feel, or how do I want to make that person feel, the rest is filled in, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Lisa, we have so much to talk about still, but I do want to look at the clock and realize we're almost there. So just to recap our conversation today, thank you so much for bringing in all of your insights and your knowledge and your practical advice and tools to really improve communication. I think from what I gathered out of this conversation is really the nonverbal thing. Like, I didn't realize the stats were so small in content, and everything else is just your overall presence and the way that you interact with someone. So that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
I really love using the word we in any conflict and really thinking about what is that person's ultimate pain point. How can I deliver a solution or really work towards this and really communicate that? I also learned from you just really being concise with everything. Having over prepare is better than under prepare. So really having those 3 points and not justifying it. Like, this is what I am sharing. This is my direct assertiveness. If you want more answers or reasoning behind it, I'm happy to share that. But that's not something I'm offering right off the bat because I have nothing to justify, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I would say just really understanding how you make people feel at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I think, the golden rule for communication.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely it is. Yeah.
There are so many more. Do you want to recap anything that I missed in terms of?
I really think you got it. I think one thing though that we both hit on, which has to do somewhat with communication, but really don't expect to have a boss that is going to support your career development. Each individual is responsible for their career development. And it's great when you get that. I was very lucky. I had a boss, a woman boss, who was super supportive of me. And it made such a big difference at a time when I really needed that support, but you can't expect that. So just be prepared to, read, hire a coach like you.
For you.
And also to create your circle of support, because one of the things that's so important is to gather with colleagues, professional colleagues who you trust, and you can share, hey, I had a win, or hey, I've got a difficult situation. How would you deal with it? You need a professional circle of support. And honestly, it's that word we don't like, networking. But through work, I've met some of my closest friends.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I'm in a different career, now that I'm out of corporate, they're still with me as my close friends.
Absolutely. I really like that because I think a lot of us do put an emphasis, while it's important to have a great boss and it's important to vet that during the interview process, we have to recognize at the end of the day, everybody is a human and everybody has other gazillion things that they're focused on, including their personal life. And so to put your career direction into one person's hand other than your own, that's a big gamble. And you're absolutely right. The one thing we do have control over is our own professional growth and development, and really continuously putting that as a priority and how we can develop that on our own. And if we have that boss, that really is a blessing and a bonus. But you're right. More often than not, you need to be your own advocate for your own growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like that. I just noticed, by the way, to kind of wrap this up, Kamal had asked a question. She wants to know if we can share some tips of how you need to communicate when newly hired. What factors to consider when communicating with senior staff and coworkers as a new hire? Ooh, this kind of reminds me of being like the new kid in school. Do you
Exactly.
want to start with that?
Um, One of the things that I did in every new job was I always went and did a short, like little 10 minutes. Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm here to do this. I was just hired. I'm excited to be here. I've heard about you. And what I had done before, I'd done my homework. So I knew who the person was. I knew what their function on the team was. And I knew just a little bit about them. And the way that I had done that was I had talked to the hiring manager. So I had said, who else is on your team and what do they do? And of course, the hiring manager is going to share that with you.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to share with you what their vision is of your job and what they want you to accomplish. So that was the first thing, just a little one-on-one to go in and introduce myself. Because sometimes your hiring manager will do that, but sometimes not.
Yeah.
So you want that face-to-face connection immediately. Then I did that
Really,
with clients and vendors. Same.
yeah. Yeah, I really like that. And I think that goes back to what we just talked about. Like, you have to take ownership and control of your own career. I know in some corporate workplaces, like, as a part of the HR team, every time we had a new hire, we would have lunch meetings set up, and we would have like one-on-one scheduled for them as part of their onboarding and their orientation. But a lot of companies don't do that. So I would say that it's really important, like, as you do step into this role, really understanding what is your personal brand? What do you want to be recognized for? If
Yes.
you want to be known as that proactive, like ambitious go-getter, then you should be the person to introduce yourself. If you're like standing in a coffee room or coffee break room together and you see somebody, do you want to be known as that like friendly person who just introduces yourself and starts that conversation? Because I think a lot of us are really there's a lot of people who are very passive, right? And so we may not be the first to make that initial introduction. But if you can really insert yourself and be that friendly face with a smile, extend your hand forward, really just quick introduction. I'm new here. I am curious what you do. I'd love to work with you or get to see you or maybe grab lunch with you sometime. I think that goes a long ways.
Yes.
But then also, I love what you said about really the one-on-ones. And I highly recommend that if your company didn't put that as part of your onboarding schedule, really think about who can I go to lunch with so that you're not sitting at the same table every day. You're not sitting with the same people every day. And that reminds me so much of like high school, where you would tend to fall into cliques, right? And you end up having lunch with the same people. But the more you can expand your network internally, the better it's going to be for you. When you think about promotions and or just knowing like these people aren't going to stay at this one company forever. I want to build as many relationships, because if they get recruited to an awesome company, I want them to know who I am, right? And I think that's one of the exercises I have people do is like write down everybody's name and like kind of map out that org chart. Where do they sit? And how can I turn everybody into a green? Meaning like I've had contact with them, I sat with them, I came to a meeting early and decided to purposely sit next to somebody new so I could introduce myself versus sitting next to that same person I sit next to every day.
Every day. Yeah, I think that's really brilliant. And it's not just meeting the people within your group, it's also in every company you work cross-departmentally.
Definitely.
And sometimes you may not see that person, but if you've met them once, and then you can get on the phone with them and just touch base again, then the next time you're actually doing business, it just facilitates it.
Oh my gosh, and it's so much more comfortable too, right? You have more fun at work when you're able to build these relationships and these rapport with people that are outside of your small department.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. I love your idea of like actually creating a map. That's
Mhm.
brilliant.
It's helpful to see it visually, and I think that's a really good thing to do in tandem with that daily accomplishment list. And I think everybody should have like a list of like 50 brags that they can really talk about throughout their career, and really remember that and revisit it whenever they're feeling down and or
Yes,
insecure, because everybody does experience imposter syndrome.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. I want to just ask if you had any other announcements you want to share. I think you had a tool or a
I do have a tool. It's called Identify Your Communication Skill, and it's based on the work of David Merrill. And I will, should I post it in the chat?
Put it in the comments. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that would
okay.
be great.
I'll put the link in.
Yes.
And it's just a really easy way. There's basically 4 types. There's the directive, or what I like to call executive, and this is the very short and to the point. There's the expressive, or what I like to call the rock star. And these are people who tend to be a little bit larger than life. My background is marketing, so I worked with a lot of that type. There is the collaborative person, and these are the person who will say, you know, what do you think? What are your thoughts? And they're looking to reach agreement. And then there is the analytical or the data driven, and it's just the facts, just the metrics. This is all part of this little survey, and you can take it and then you can see, you know what, I'm much more analytical. Oh, okay, maybe I could put a little collaboration in there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a fun little survey to take, and it's based on the work of David Merrill.
That's great. I'm definitely going to take it. I think from listening to that, though, the 4 descriptors, I am I'm curious how the results match to this, but I'm going to guess that I'm collaborative out of the 4. So that's really fun. Do you think that it's good to kind of predict before and then?
You know what? I think read the descriptions and see what kind of lands with you. I mean, everybody is not only one type.
Oh, okay.
And depending on what situation you are in, you could modify how you communicate.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
you could be a very expressive rock star with your particular team, and then you get into another environment and you become an engineer, a data driven, totally analytical. So you know, and that's something else to look at, is like, do you respond differently? Because, you know, we all behave at a Thanksgiving dinner, which we just had. We have a certain decorum versus when we're out walking our dog in the park. We might be, you know, rolling around on the grass with our dog. So it's 2 different environments, 2 different ways of reacting. And that's how it is with communication too. So you're not only one type. And I just want to share for everybody, you can adapt your communication style so that it serves you better in the workplace. You
Absolutely.
absolutely can.
It's something that we're all continuously working on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. One last question. Where can people find you?
I am at Big Sky, BIGSKY, coaching and consulting. And I'm looking for the link to hope to put that in.
Yeah, you can add it to the comments. But yeah, everybody check out Lisa. She's amazing.
Oh, Emily, you're amazing. And you know what? Let's get more women into positions of leadership, because we can make a difference. And men and women are both enlightened leaders. But you know what? We find in business, when we can cross that 30% threshold, we generate more money when we're in leadership position. Yeah. So there's a higher.
I'm on board with that mission.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so important. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. I'm going to end this live stream.